think we left off with, I was just talking about my apprenticeship. But we were also talking about twins that were born at home that I realized I didn't describe them really well enough. So I wanted to go back to those twins to really talk about some issues that, or some details about their births and what they were. So, for example, I failed to mention that they were identical twins. So we're talking about the home birth that happened of undiagnosed twins. This was 35 years ago when we weren't using ultrasound we weren't using ultrasound except for high risk situations. Which is what ultrasound was intended for. Ultrasound has become something very different. It's being used quite routinely now, even though the recommendations over the years have always been that not to use it routinely because it actually doesn't change the outcome of pregnancy. It's very interesting, and it costs us a small fortune. So, okay, that aside, we weren't using ultrasound at the time, so we didn't know that there were twins. The way we determined that they were identical twins was within a few hours after that birth, we did get that placenta off to pathology at the local hospital so that they could determine what type of twins they were. And that was the only way to be sure at the time, was by examining the placenta. And of course, it had to be done quite soon, because the placenta, as soon as it's no longer functioning in the uterus, once it's been pushed out of the body, it starts to deteriorate very fast. Placentas break down so fast. Anyway, so you've got to get them off pretty quick to get any useful information from them. And it did take, I'm trying to remember how long it took, but it did take a certain amount of time. I think it was at least a couple of months before we had a determination that they were in fact identical twins. I don't recall at this point whether we knew what kind of identical twins. The difference though is that with twins, identical, first off, they're developed from one egg. So the egg has been fertilized and doesn't just duplicate itself when it starts to grow, but it doubles that. So you've got these two identical babies. So, but there are different levels of what identical twin births can be. So it depends on if there's sometimes there's, well, no, with identical twins, there's one placenta, but there can be two amnions. That's so the sac that the baby lives in is made of two layers. So the amnion and the chorion. So there can be two amnions, one chorion. There can be two amnions and two chorions. Which means they both had their own perfect sac. Or there can be one amnion. Would I say that? One amnion, one chorion. So that's your most. Those are the twins that have the higher risk, is when they share the amnion and chorion together. That's, if you have twin-to-twin transfusion, that's often where it will occur in those situations. So,
what is twin-to-twin transfusion?
Twin-to-twin transfusion simply is that the one baby is receiving more flow from the placenta than the second baby. So one will grow bigger than the other, and in some situations, it can be lethal for that baby that's not receiving the same amount of nutrients from the placenta. So anyway, in this situation, it was determined that yes, they were identical twins. And so going back to that birth, when I described that baby, the first baby being born, the first baby which was head down, and of course we had no idea there was another baby. So this first baby was presenting head down, which, we're just like everything's normal. But when the baby's head came out, before the body came out, there was thick, dark meconium pouring out.
What's meconium?
Meconium is the stool that is in the baby's bowel, so it's part of the first bowel movements. And you'll see meconium, the baby will pass meconium for the first 3 days before the mother's milk comes in, and it starts to change to what we call a breast milk stool. So it's dark, it's thick, it's like tar. And in some situations where the baby's in distress, they will pass that meconium while the mother's in labor. And if they breathe that in, it's a complete irritant to the lungs. So it can cause severe breathing problems when the baby's born. It can lead to pneumonia, and it can actually kill this new baby that is really struggling to breathe because it can't open its lungs. Can't open the lungs because this meconium is preventing a full ventilation happening, which would allow good oxygen to the baby. So anyway, with this, as this baby, what we didn't know is there was another baby coming. So while we're suctioning that baby, trying to get the meconium out of it once it was born, not realizing that that meconium wasn't even from that baby, and that baby, in fact, didn't take any of that meconium in. We were quite amazed, actually, that with the suctioning there really wasn't much meconium. It was just really probably what was inside the mouth. So what happens, though, the next baby came breech. So what happens with a breech delivery is the pressure of the uterus and the contractions puts pressure on their gut, and they pass meconium. It's a normal part of a breech birth. So they'll pass meconium before they're born. So that's what had happened. It was that next baby coming that was releasing the meconium, which was pouring down over this first baby. Of course, that all, we realized that once we realized there was another baby, and once that baby was born, it's like, okay, it all makes sense of what was happening. And like I say, from that birth, the both babies did quite well. They nursed easily. I think we stayed with them for about 3 or 4 hours after the birth, and everybody was stable. So we went home and just did our usual follow-up postpartum care, and they did fine. Now, 3 months later, they and as I'd mentioned, the first baby was 5 pounds 11 ounces. The second baby was 4 pounds 1 ounce. So the baby that came breech was the tiny baby. Anyway, 3 months later, they went for their first inoculation, which was, the standard time to do it. Okay, so they went for their first inoculation about 3 months after their birth. So we're talking about 12 weeks, around there, 12, 13 weeks. And that night, the baby that had been born with the higher weight died. So the parents found that baby in its crib, dead, in the wee hours of the morning. And anyway, of course, the baby was taken by the coroner, and the other baby was taken to the pediatrician for assessment. And at that time, that pediatrician recommended no more inoculations. That pediatrician felt that that was a reaction to the inoculations, and that's what had caused the death of that first baby. So otherwise it would have been called like a cot death, which is basically just otherwise healthy baby just found dead when parents come to tend to the babies, which, you know, when it's newborns, it's usually every few hours. So it was interesting also to me that it was the larger baby that actually died for whatever reason. I don't think we'll ever know whether it was a reaction to the inoculation or whether it was something else or just something congenital. We just don't know. So, but that was what happened there. So, while it was a normal twin delivery and a normal first 3 months where they were thriving and gaining weight, doing beautifully, and then that happened, which was incredibly sad. And so, anyway, we continue. So my apprenticeship went on until probably 1991. Oh no. I'm thinking I started in 1982. Apprenticed for a couple of years, so it's 83. Maybe it was till 84 that I was apprenticing. So the rest of those years was I was taking on births myself. And I had some interesting cases there too. It's always interesting cases, always, as I say, a constant reminder that birth is normal. So one lady that came to me during that time with her first pregnancy, and she described to me that it had been found that she had a double uterus. So she had the classic, it's like very, very unusual. She had two uteri, two cervixes, and two vaginas. And the reason they had discovered this is because through having intercourse with her partner, with her husband, that was very uncomfortable, she went in for some assessment with a gynecologist where they found that, well, you're having difficulty because you have two vaginas and they're both pretty small. So they surgically removed a wall between them so that there would be one vagina. And then she was told that she would likely never be able to get pregnant because of this abnormality. Of course, she got pregnant. And then she went to a doctor and with her pregnancy who said, well, chances are you're going to miscarry. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to have a successful pregnancy with this condition. And she didn't miscarry, but she didn't like what she was hearing, so she found me and came to me and talked about her situation. And it's funny because one of the things I'd done as I was learning to be a midwife, as I was beginning my studies, and I mentioned it earlier, I'd read this book called Spiritual Midwifery, where in there they described a situation with a woman with two uteri, two cervixes, two vaginas, and having a normal birth. So I remember saying to her, I said, well, you know, I've read about this, and what I've read is that you can have a normal birth. So we proceeded. She kept coming to me for prenatal care, and her doctor, once she got past 3 months, her doctor said, well, you know, you're probably going to have a premature birth. You're going to need a cesarean section. This is just never, ever going to be, it's not possible for it to be a normal birth. And I kept talking to her and saying, you know, I don't know, but I think we can't assume that is this quite possibly could be a normal birth. She ended up having a normal home birth with me, with her first baby. And, well, I shouldn't say it was completely normal because she did have a retained placenta. So I had to send her into the hospital because that placenta was not going to come out on its own, in which it didn't. this lady with the double uteri, double cervix. Well, now she has one vagina because of a surgical repair. Has one normal birth, but a retained placenta. So, I mean, the one thing of note here really is that she was treated quite poorly in hospital because she had given birth at home. So this would have been back in 1985, perhaps. And it was considered, child abuse, basically. Why on earth would you want to do something like that? So I think is an important part of the history and how women were perceived and how they were treated through choosing to deliver their babies in their own homes. Which to me was a bizarre concept because I had been born at home as a normal part of the obstetrical system in Britain. So it's like I just don't understand this huge panic over home births. Anyway, she then came to me a couple of years later with her next pregnancy, which was also very interesting because that labor, through doing a vaginal exam to assess where she's at, how far dilated she is, that's when I could feel both cervix. So I hadn't noticed that the first time. Obviously, it was probably not that cervix that was active was the only one that I could feel. With this second pregnancy, I could feel both of them. So, and I found that at about 4 or 5 centimeters, one stopped dilating while the other continued, because the one that continued, of course, was the one that had that particular baby in it. So, again, this situation where a woman's been told that she cannot possibly have a normal birth, she would need a cesarean section, is now having her next baby with the same condition and has another successful normal birth. And then she came to me with her third baby and another normal birth. So, and now anybody who wants to say, well, you just got lucky, because that's a typical reaction to any success with these situations where a physician has said, well, you can't possibly do that. That's never going to work. Oh, you got lucky. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think this is part of birth. And there are some variations on normal that they might be unusual. They might not be seen that often, but it doesn't make them abnormal. It's just a variation. And she's living proof of that. So anyway, going back to the apprenticeship, I mean, there's so many stories, so many birth stories, and I'll probably talk about them as we go along, as I start giving examples of unusual situations that resulted in a very normal and very healthy baby. Which for me, again, was the most reassuring. It was this constant reminder that birth is normal, the body is phenomenal in what its ability is, and we must have some faith in it, and we must resist the desire to interfere because we think that we can make things better or make things faster or whatever. We must resist, because the body has its own wisdom and does a beautiful job when it's allowed to do it.